how they survived it all, how they lived with their memories, knowing what they knew, having seen what they saw. Many of them had lost their entire families. The world in which they grew up was gone. They had to begin again as strangers in a strange land. Yet they were, and they are, the most life-affirming people I've ever met. What struck me most was that they lived without resentment. They did not seek revenge. They did not seek hate. They cared more than anyone else I knew when other people were being massacred in Bosnia, Rwanda, Kosovo, Sudan. They began to tell their stories, especially to young people. In later life, they used to visit schools. They spoke about what had happened, how they survived, but their fundamental message was not about the past at all. What they wanted young people to know was what a miracle it is that there is food to eat, windows that you can open, gates that you can walk out of, a future to look forward to. They spoke about tolerance and how important it is to care for people who are different from you, work for it, fight for it, stand up, especially for minorities, and never give up and never hate. For decades, they did not speak about the past, even to their spouses, even to their children. They focused single-mindedly on the future. They learned the language and culture of their new home. They worked and they built careers. They married and they had children. Only when they felt secure about the future, absolutely secure, 40 or 50 years on, did they allow themselves to turn back and remember the past. That was what I learned from the survivors. First, you have to build a future. Only then can you revisit the past without being held captive by the past. And so I'm now going to present to you Margot Lobree, who's going to tell you her story.
Thank you, Bob. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. As you know, I am a Holocaust survivor. And before I start into my own story, I'll tell you just a little bit of background on where my story began. In the fall of 1938, numerous laws were passed in Germany that restricted Jewish economic activities and occupational opportunities. And as of January 1 of 1939, all Jews had to carry identification cards. On October the 28th of 1938, 17,000 Polish Jews, many of whom had been living in Germany for decades, were arrested and relocated across the Polish border. The Polish government refused to let them in, to admit them, and so they were relocated in internment, what they called relocation camps, near the Polish border. Among the deportees was a family by the name of Greenspan, who had been living in Hanover, city in Germany, since 1911. On October the 27th of 1938, their belongings were confiscated and they were forced to move across the Polish border. Their 17-year-old son at that time was living with an uncle in Paris. And when he received the news about his family's expulsion, he went to the German embassy and took it upon himself, and he was going to kill the German ambassador. On November the 7th, he went there. The ambassador was not there, and he settled for a lesser official. The third secretary, Ernst von Rath, was critically wounded and died 2 days later on November the 9th. The revenge for that murder started a pogrom against German Jews, and since it was interpreted an act against Hitler himself, the rampage also carried over into newly acquired territories like Austria, the Sudetenland, and that night of November the 9th became known as Crystal Night, the night of the shattered glass. It was the night when the rampage set on fire the synagogues, and that is where my story begins. And as you know, when we speak of the Holocaust, the first thing that comes to mind are concentration camps, cruelty, and all different kinds of forms of death. In my case, I was never in a camp. I never had my head shaved. I do not have a number tattooed on my arm. I always had food and a bed to sleep in. And although Holocaust related, my experience was different. After November the 9th of 1938, Crystal Night, England immediately began to rescue 10,000 children from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, which is now the Czech Republic. I was one of those children. The ages ranged from the ages of 3 months to 17 years. We traveled by train from different areas via Holland to England. And later we became known as the train children. Now I want you to take a moment and imagine that as a child, coming home one day, being told that alone you're going to have to leave your family, your friends, leave all your belongings, and go to a foreign country with a foreign language and live with strangers. And that is basically what happened to me. I knew that our life in Germany had become very difficult. It went from being very comfortable to being a struggle to exist. As children, we had friends one day who would not speak or play with us the next day only because we were Jewish. We had to leave the schools we attended for no other reason than the fact that because we were Jewish. We had to attend schools for Jewish students only. The day after Crystal Night, we saw our synagogues burn. We saw Nazis coming to the house, looking to arrest men for no other reason than the fact that they were Jewish. Now, I have to admit that as a child, I did not understand the severity of the situation until later in my life. My father had died early that year. My mother tried to protect her 2 children as much as she could. The day after Crystal Night, her elderly parents, who had lived in a village all their lives, had thrown rocks thrown through their windows, chased out, and came to live with us. At that moment, my mother had to make some very major, fast decisions. Now, my brother was old enough to immigrate to Palestine, today Israel, where he remained for the rest of his life. And since I was not old enough, my escape was to England. We applied. I was accepted, And in April of 1939, my mother took me to the station where there were other children, where we started our journey to our new homes. And after the first train ride and an overnight ferry ride and a second train ride, we arrived at Liverpool Station in London. Some of us were met by sponsors. Others were met by Bloomsbury House, which was the committee responsible for all the children who came, and they found them homes. And if they didn't find homes, they went into orphanages, farms, or hostels. I was picked up by a family who sponsored me, which was lucky, but not necessarily a good experience. Or maybe it was a fast-growing experience. I was told repeatedly that I was a refugee and I should be grateful for being where I was. I ate with a maid in the kitchen. I worked in the house before I went to school in the morning and after I came home from school in the afternoon. I became cheap labor. And today I would say I was exploited. Within a few months of my arrival in England, war broke out, 3rd of September of 1939, and the bombing started. The family I lived with evacuated, leaving me and the maid behind in London to face the Blitz. And eventually they told the committee that they could not afford me anymore, and I was sent to a hostel outside London. In this case was a school for refugee girls, type of an orphanage. The girls ranged from the age of 4 to 16. And I lived there for 2 years. Rust Hall Beacon, the place where I lived, was not a bad place. Some of the staff were nice, some of them not so nice. But we children had each other. The older ones taking care of the younger ones, and life went on. At the age of 15, I was sent to a shop to help clean it up and start to learn dressmaking. And after 2 years at the Beacon, one of the girls who I became very, very friendly with, and am still friends today, we decided that we had enough and we wanted to venture out on our own. We requested and got permission to go back to live in London. Julie had an aunt in London, an uncle, and of course that helped. First, we moved to another hostel. We found jobs and managed to support ourselves. And after a couple of months of that we wanted out. We rented a room from a lady who was very kind and told the committee that she would give us meals because actually the committee felt that we were not old enough to be totally self-sufficient and on our own. Anyway, Julie and I lived in that room for a little while and then rented a little apartment where we lived until I left for the United States in April of 1944. Now at that time there was a war going on. It took 2 weeks to get from Liverpool, England to Boston. We encountered a horrendous storm on the Atlantic. And that was my first experience of cruising. How I ever learned to love it, it was a miracle. Life in England was not easy. We barely made ends meet, but we never worried that others might have better lives than we did. We went to dances. We met boys. We were teenagers and managed to enjoy. We wore the same clothes most of the time because we could not afford new ones. But then with the war going on, no one we knew had much more. Besides, everything was rationed. Now later, as I thought of my experience in England, being there because of the Holocaust, I realized how much I had been deprived of. I lost the loving attention of family. I was deprived of a good education and growing up under normal circumstances. I was deprived of learning who I am and how to be an adult in a safe environment. I had to figure out what was right or wrong. If I did wrong, there was no one there to help me. In other words, I was deprived of a childhood. Now, once I was married, and I saw many of my friends with their parents, the relationship they had with them, not only as a parent-child relationship, but as a friendship, I realized what I was missing. I only understood the trauma and the tragedy of my experience as an adult. And after reading a book by Leon Uris called Exodus, the part where Karen's father takes her to the train station and says goodbye to her as she's leaving for Denmark. At that time, I had a child already. And I asked myself, if I had to, could I or would I give up my child? And at that moment, I understood the heartbreak my mother must have gone through and what she too was denied. She missed seeing her children as responsible adults and also at being a grandmother. The love that she had for my brother and I, sending both of us away within 6 weeks of each other to make sure that we would be safe, that our lives would be spared, is indescribable. Her strength was tremendous, knowing that she may never see either one of us again. We did manage to communicate for a while, but that stopped in early of 1941. And now, of course, my children were always also deprived of a grandmother, the love of that special relationship. And recognizing the enormity of it all made me very angry. And when the opportunity arose for me to go back to Frankfurt, Germany, the city where I was born, I was very reluctant. And I said, never. They didn't want me before. Why would I want to go back there now? Well, never is a long time. As I aged and mellowed, I began to see things differently. In 1946, I was invited to the former city as a citizen to visit Frankfurt as their guest. At that time, I said I would only go if my brother could join me from Israel. So by now I wanted to show my husband where I was born. And also we had the opportunity to bring over our oldest son to show him where his mother had her beginning. And I was pleasantly surprised. From the moment we stepped off the plane it was obvious that we were dealing with a different generation. A generation that seemed remorseful and wanted us to know that it would never be allowed to happen again what their parents allowed to happen. Now, I'm not saying that there was no anti-Semitism, and there's even more of it now. And we have it right here in this country. Now, my brother and I walked our childhood. We visited every apartment we lived in, were graciously received. We visited every school we attended. We spoke in several high schools to classes, and were treated and received with the utmost courtesy and kindness. Now, the trip taught me something. Holding on to anger and grudges is a waste of energy. It is not productive, it's destructive. Anger at anything, may it be children, parents, family, or friends, when it's over, let it go. My childhood experience taught me, no matter what happened, I am glad that I did not hold on to my anger, but went forward with my life. And I knew that that's what my mother would have wanted me to do. Eventually, with the encouragement and the tremendous love of my late husband, I caught up with my high school education, my college education, and my chosen profession as a travel counselor has given me the opportunity to see most of the world. I enjoyed 55 and a half years of happy marriage. I'm the proud mother of 2 fabulous sons, adore my 2 daughter-in-laws, enjoy grandchildren, even adopted a couple of great-grandchildren along the way. And finally, I want to say, my late brother and I never saw our mother again, nor did we ever get confirmation as to what happened to her or which camp she perished in. We finally, after 25 years, I saw my brother again for the first time. That was the time we left. We parted as children and met again when we were both parents. And we had, since 1963, been very fortunate to see each other frequently, and we treasured every moment that we spent together. And in the end, I must say that life has been good. I'm here to tell the story, a story that is already becoming history, but a story that must never be forgotten and never be allowed to happen again. I thank you.
So we'll take some questions. Anyone? Barry?
I don't think I need to wait. We don't. From my heart to yours, Toda Rabah, thank you so much. This is a story, there's fewer and fewer survivors, and this is a story that must be told and retold for each generation. The Jews across the world are committed to never again. Never again to go like that. And not just for us, but for all refugees that would come here. I don't compare this to Holocaust. They're very different in many ways. But Jews will not allow Muslims or any other group to be singled out with the yellow star or anything like that. It can't happen to any group. Please, those of you that can find the time, touched by this, it tells us what it's like to be a stranger in a strange land. I hope that some of you will be able to help these refugees, make them feel a little bit more accepted, help them with their English, whatever. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but how old were you when you were put on that train without any family?
The question is, how old was I when I was put on the train? Okay. I was 13. And spent my teenage years, next 5 years in England.
And your brother?
My brother remained in Israel for the rest of his life.
How old was he?
He was 16. He was 17 actually as he arrived in Israel. He was 17 on his way. Yes.
Margot, thank you for your presentation and sharing your personal story. Interfaith Winston-Salem, we try to help create the conversation among the various religious traditions to try to bring about a more peaceable world. You commented that anti-Semitism still exists. Can you speak to that first from your own experience here in the United States and or just in general?
Can I speak of anti-Semitism with my own experience here in the United States? Actually, yes, I had one experience, but it's many years ago. When I came, and I'm glad to see I have another Californian here. When I came to San Francisco, right after I was married, I applied for a job at the Bank of America. Now, I had had a Wall Street background because that's where I started my career. So and they refused to hire me because I was Jewish. Because came the high holidays, there were just too many people out. End of conversation. I have since asked my children if they had any experiences in school. And they said yes, there were some minor experiences. We never went into depth of it. But yes, they had experiences. My late husband is an engineer. It was very difficult for him to get into the profession as a Jew. And he was born and raised in San Francisco, born in this country. So yes, there was anti-Semitism around, and I think they're still, yes, they're still hidden. There's still many distinctions, differences.
Just to follow up on that, do you have any sense of what those myths are that people believe about Jews?
Number one, I think we sort of, I think we sort of have we have a reputation like mother-in-laws. We sort of have a distinct reputation. I mean, we just sort of, point at. And I really don't know why. I mean, I'm as a Jew, I'm very proud of being a Jew. And I'm very proud of what the Jewish people over the centuries and the history have accomplished and survived from. So therefore, maybe it's because of this pride, maybe because of these accomplishments, maybe because of the Nobel Prizes and all the things that we've done in the world of music and art and medicine, science. Maybe this has distinguished us to a point where there's a certain amount of resentment. There's a certain amount of jealousy. We've got to find a scapegoat. When things are bad, we've got to find a reason who to blame. I don't have the answer, but that is the inner feeling.
I'm just going to make a comment there too. Growing up in the South, in Lakeland, Florida, Central Florida, I encountered very little And yet I know that we were not allowed to join the country club. And my dad was very much involved in the community, and they offered him a membership, and he turned it down. He said, not unless it's open to everyone. And then in college, I was restricted to certain fraternities and things. So it was sort of there underlying for many of us.
And in that way, I understand that you couldn't join the country club here many years ago.
Correct.
And they're to establish a Jewish country club in Winston-Salem.
Or in Charlotte. Or in Charlotte.
So, you know,
Last 20 years.
I mean,
And then
So
there's that Judeo-Christian calendar.
I'm sorry?
Then there's that Judeo-Christian calendar that everyone follows.
yes,
It's just hard for Christians to see how that is discriminatory.
So I want to ask a question. How did you manage, Margot, to give up the hate? How were you able to let that go?
attitude. How did I manage to give up the hate? Number one, I think I was too young to hate. Children are not born to hate. Children are survivors. Children are very, they're strong, they're resilient. And, you know, they manage to live. I don't think I ever hated to the point where I was angry. But attitude. You know, you yourself told me that you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it. And I think that's a matter of attitude. I mean, I lived a very happy life. I was very fortunate. I had a very husband who obviously believed in me and made life very happy. I had nothing to complain about.
Other questions? Yes, Jay.
This may be naive, but I find it a little surprising that even in the late 1930s, there was a recognition in Germany of what the potential was for the Nazis doing to the Jewish community. I thought maybe there was not that kind of recognition that early on among the Jewish community. Is that my naivete, or is there some truth to that?
The question is that was there recognition in Germany in the late 30s as to what was going to happen or what was going on? Number one, Hitler came to power in 1933. And that's really right, we really felt the change right then and there. There was an immediate attitude that he came with, and I think he wrote in Mein Kampf what his intentions were and he wanted to create a pure Aryan race. And anything that was not pure and blonde and blue-eyed or whatever, he went after it. Semitics, he went after homosexuals, he went after some of the priests. I mean, he didn't just confine himself to Jews. In the end, it became the final solution. He was going to destroy them all. But his intentions were to create a pure race. And at least to my knowledge, and I don't say that, maybe there are other explanations. But I will say that the assimilated Jew in Germany who fought in the First World War, who had the Iron Cross, who was very proud of that, never realized that anything could happen that did eventually happen. They thought that with these distinctions, they were just a part of it. So I think, but actually the anti-Semitism started in 1933. And we felt it, don't buy from Jews, don't patronize Jewish stores. So, there was signs. I had to leave school when I was 7 years old. That was long before. So it was there, but I don't think that anybody, at least I don't know, that they realized that immigration became difficult. Quotas became very small. It was very difficult for Jews to leave Europe. The escape was in the end, it was impossible.
So many people in this room are on a faith journey. How did your life experience affect your faith?
You know, I was born a Jew, I was raised a Jew, I've lived as a Jew. It has never changed. I try to maintain my Jewishness throughout my life in England, even when I did not have the ability to practice or just go along with what there was. I was always very proud of being a Jew, and it would never even have occurred to me to be anything else. I'm born a Jew and I'll die a Jew.
Other questions? So I want to ask one more. It's a nice story. I want you to tell the group about how you met your husband.
My husband, as I said, was born and raised in San Francisco. And I had a couple of uncles who lived in San Francisco. And I was in England, and I was, as I said, 13 years old, 14 years old. And one of the uncles came to visit my late mother-in-law, and she mentioned that he had a little niece in England he had to write to. This was just war broke out, or just right after. And my late husband, who was a number of years older than I was, in his late teens, said, "No, give me your name and address, and I'll write to her." And that started an 8.5-year pen palship. He wrote to me every so often. I wrote to him. And then when I came to the States, I was 18 years old, going on 19. And he was in the Navy, and then it was patriotic to write to a sailor. So I did that. I lived in New York for 4.5 years, and we communicated by mail. And in August of 1948, my two uncles sent me the money to come and visit them in San Francisco. And the late David came and picked me up at the airport in Oakland. And that was the first time I had seen him in civilian clothes. I had a picture of him in the Navy uniform. I had never talked to him. That was the first time. And I tripped off, come down the stairs in the airplane. But, and I keep saying, those who lived in New York and knew the dust and the soot and the high rise and all that, and came to San Francisco on this magnificent day, driving from Oakland across the bridge into San Francisco with this gorgeous white skyline. And I keep saying, I don't know whether I fell in love with the skyline or the guy. But whatever happened, less than 48 hours he proposed. I said yes and never turned back. Never had a date with a guy. And I went back to New York 3 weeks later. In fact, for the first 10 days, we didn't even tell his mother. We decided it was so ridiculous and crazy. And exactly 7 weeks to the day, I came back to San Francisco on a Saturday afternoon. And Sunday morning at 4:30, we left for Reno, just the two of us, and got married. And our wedding cost $2 for the license, $25 for the rabbi, and $5 for the witnesses. So I'm always saying that it's not the cost of the wedding, it's the marriage that makes it. That's my story.
Please remember to make a donation.